Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatha Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shivashikam Vitam Scha Om Ajnana Timarandasha Yanajana Shalakaya Chakshuramilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Gurva Bhistam Supurakam Guraganara Sisha Sambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipanam Shri Rupa Patanugam Govinda Bidam Ujwalam Varatanum Bhaktyan Vidam Sundaram Mande Vishwa Gurun Shah Divyad Bhagavad Prem Noe Bija Pradam Devam Divyatanum Suchanda Varanam Balarka Chelanchitam Sandrananda Puram Sareka Varanam Vairagya Vidyam Buddhim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Baram Banditam Shubharam Marika Sharanam Nashishvara Sridharam Vanshakopatarubyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gorata Vishay Namah. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, The Hidden Treasure of the Sweet Absolute by Srila Bhakti, Sridhar, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev-Goswami Maharaj. And this is chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Karma Yoga, the path of action. And I'm begin with verse number 10. Sahayagya praja shrishva puruvacha prajapati anena prasavishtyabyam esha vost vishta kamaduk. Sahayagya praja shrishva puruvacha prajapati anena prasavishyadvam Esha Vost Vishta Kamaduk. In the beginning, Lord Brahma manifested the progeny of the world along with sacrifices. He instructed them thus: take shelter of this religious principle of sacrifice, prosper and flourish. May such sacrifice be the bestower of the things you desire. And the word sacrifice, yajna, it is said yajna vai Vishnu. That sacrifice is meant for the satisfaction of the Lord. Devam bhavaya tanena te deva bhavayantu va parasparam bhavayanta shreya param avapsyata. Propitiate the gods by sacrifices, and may they satisfy you by bestowing your desired fruits. In this way, through mutual nourishment, you will be the gainers of great auspiciousness. So this is also confirming that one comes into this world, and the world is not just for one's enjoyment. One is meant to perform some service which will be satisfying to the Lord. So this mentality results in sacrifice. It is also said that in the first verse of the Brahma Samhita it says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. There specifically remarks that the Supreme Lord, the Lord of all the demigods, when one is offering sacrifices to the different gods, ultimately all those sacrifices are meant for the Lord, because the demigods, we could say, are operating under the province of the Lord. They are deputed to perform different tasks by the Lord himself. So all sacrifice ultimately is meant for the Lord. And there it says, Anadir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam, that he is the cause of all causes. So as Srila Maharaj has explained, that reality is by itself and for itself. So reality is by itself, that Krishna is the cause of all causes, and reality is for itself. Then when we have the vision that ultimately all waves are flowing towards the center. So that means everything is meant for the satisfaction of the Lord. He is the center, and everything is ultimately moving in that direction. Propitiate the gods by sacrifices, and may they satisfy you by bestowing your desired fruits. In this way, through mutual nourishment, you will be the gainers of great auspiciousness. Ishtan Bhogan Ivo Deva Dashante Yagyabhavita Tardatan Apradayaibhyo Yo Bhunkte Stena Evasa. Propitiated by sacrifices, the gods, my worldly representatives, will bestow upon you all your desired enjoyable things. But one who enjoys what is given by the gods without offering to them is a thief. So if one tries to enjoy this world without the element of sacrifice, without understanding that everything is occurring by the will of the Lord, without trying to satisfy the Lord, ultimately one is a thief. And what does that mean? It means that by the laws of karma, one will ultimately not do well, let's say. And how I can explain this. Suppose you go into a restaurant and you order so many things to eat, and you're eating and enjoying. At the end, the waiter will come and will present you with a bill, and you have to pay that bill. You're receiving so many things, but you also have to pay the bill. So in this world, we are meant to perform sacrifice. It's not exactly, maybe the example, it's not exactly like paying a bill, but if you are enjoying those things that the world has to offer without offering some form of sacrifice, which means trying to satisfy the Lord, then ultimately you're like a thief. You're stealing. So in that way things can be understood. Yagya Shishta Shina Santo Muchante Sarvakil Bishai Bunjate Tedvagam Papa Ye Pachanti Atmakaranat. By accepting sacrificial remnants of the universal gods, virtuous persons are liberated from all sins arising from violence towards other living entities. But those who prepare food for their own pleasure partake only of sin. Now, by accepting sacrificial remnants of the universal gods, the remnants referred to here are not the same as the Krishna Prasad, food that has been offered to the Supreme Lord by his devotees. So by accepting sacrificial remnants of the universal gods, virtuous persons are liberated from all sins arising from violence towards other living entities. But those who prepare food for their own pleasure partake of sin. And then someone can say, well, why sin? Why is it being put in those phrases, in those terms? Because the law of this nature is that one living entity is living by eating another living entity. So we can see that someone's living in this world, they're eating other living entities. And there is some sin incurred in that without the element of sacrifice. So what is the sin? Somebody would say, well, obviously somebody can understand that if one is eating the flesh of animals, that animals have to die for their satisfying their tongue or for their so-called nutrition. Animals are dying, animals are killed, and one will have to have some reaction for that. In fact, the word for flesh is mamsa, and mamsa means I eat you, you eat me. Mamsha. So, I eat you, you eat me. The animal, I'm eating this animal, and in the future this animal will be eating me. So, obviously, then somebody could say, well, that's okay, I'm not a meat eater, I'm a vegetarian. In fact, I'm even more than a vegetarian, I'm a vegan. But vegans are eating vegetables, and those vegetables and fruits, etc. But those vegetables, they're also living, and you're eating carrots. Carrots is living. You have to. So when Krishna explains this in relationship to prasadam, where here it's been differentiated, this of sacrifices to the gods to relieve oneself of sin, but in terms of Krishna prasadam, when one takes Krishna prasadam, actually one purifies one's existence. But that prasadam is actually, and Krishna says, a leaf, a flower, water, fruit. All these things can be offered to the Lord, and then after offering, one can take those remnants as Krishna prasadam, prasadam means the mercy of the Lord. So that is actually purifying for one's existence. Now this is a nice verse here, 14. Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhava yagya bhavati parjanyo yagya karma samud bhava. Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhava yagyad bhavati parjanyo yagya karma samudbhava. The living beings' bodies are manifest from food. Food is manifest due to rain. Rainfall ensues from the performance of sacrifice, and action is the cause of sacrifice. So the living beings' bodies are manifest from food, so we're eating. Food is manifest due to rain. Without rain, crops cannot be grown. Rainfall ensues from the performance of sacrifice. Sacrifice is done, and as a result of sacrifice, rainfall comes. Rainfall ensues from the performance of sacrifice, and action is the cause of sacrifice. So how one ultimately get food, action means that you're actively performing sacrifice. You're doing some sacrifice as a result of the propitious performance of sacrifice. That means by satisfying the higher, we can say, the gods, the living entities who are, in charge of the proper administration of the creation, etc. Rainfall ensues from the performance of sacrifice. Food is manifest due to rain, and the living beings' bodies are manifest from food. So all your well-being will ultimately be as a result of your actions meant to satisfy the Lord and the devotees. And 15, let's see. Karma brahmodbhavam vidi brahmakshara samudbhavam tasmat sarvagatam brahma nityam yagye pratishtitam. Now here is something about the previous verse. It says, Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhava yagyad bhavati parjanyo yagya karma samudbhava. And it says anad, and literally speaking, from food, anad usually will say, anad refers to grains. Anad, bhavanti bhutani. And here it mentions in the word-by-word translation from food, transformed into semen and blood. So, then the living bodies of all living beings become manifest. Anasambhava, food is manifest. Parjanya, due to rainfall. Parjanya, rainfall. Bhavati occurs due to yajna, or sacrifice. And yajna, sacrifice. Karma samudbhava, is born of action. Now I heard in Vrindavan, one comical, we could say comical conversation between, because here it says anad, from food, means grains, transformed into semen and blood. Now, that's mentioned in the word-by-word translation. Now, Prabhupada was walking on a morning walk, and this is all I can say, for me it was like classic Prabhupada, we can say, just fooling everybody. And they said, oh, Prabhupada, there are some devotees in Los Angeles that are only eating Ekadasi preparations. Means they're not taking any grains. And then Prabhupada, this is where he had everyone fooled when he began, he said, oh, advancement. Then they said, advancement, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, yes. And then some scholarly person quoted this. But Prabhupada, in the Bhagavad Gita said, anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhava yagyad bhavati parjanyo yagya karma samudbhava. All living entities subsist on food grains. Food grains are produced by rain, and rain is produced from sacrifice. And sacrifice, as we hear here, results from action. So he said, but there in the Gita it says all living entities subsist on food grains. And here also it's interesting because what reminds me, it says, from food transformed into semen and blood. And so they said, but Prabhupada, in the Gita it says all living entities subsist on food grains. And he said, that is only in reference to those who are passing semen. That's what Srila Prabhupada said. Then he said, so they were, then he said, otherwise. So when he was fooling everyone by saying, oh, advancement, that people weren't eating any grains, they were just observing Ekadasi all the time. So then later, when Prabhupada, he spoke like that, and everybody was very much perplexed. But I thought Prabhupada was just fooling everybody. And when Prabhupada got to Los Angeles, and then he said, when he said, that is for those who are passing semen, that is for animals. Only animals need to eat food grains, for those who are animals. Okay. Then, and when Prabhupada went to Los Angeles, they brought these devotees, and they said, these devotees are only taking Ekadasi preparations. And he said, oh, why is that? And they said, well, Srila Prabhupada, you indicated that only animals need to eat food grains. And then Prabhupada said, I eat grains. Do I look like an animal? So I felt it was a perfect setup, but this verse reminds me of that. Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhava yagyad bhavati parjanyo yagyad karma samudbhava. Because specifically it's mentioning ana and anad. So normally we'll consider ana refers to rice or food grains like that. Like we say the prayer before taking prasadam, we say, how does the prasadam prayer go? Pardon me? Sharirava vidyajal jonandriya taika jiva fele vishayas agare tarmadya jiva yati lovamoy sadur mati takijeta what is it? Well, it goes again. Sharirava vidyajal chodindriya taikal jiva feli visha sagare tarmadye jiviyati lovamoy sadurmati takichete kandina samsare Krishna boradoya moy kori bora jiva joy sa prashadani de lobai shanamrita pao Radha Krishna gunagao premidako Chaitanya nitai. So that would say Sharirava vidyajal chodindriya taikal jiva feli visha sagare Tarmadye jiviyati lovamoy sadurmati takijatina samsare Krishna boradoya mor kori bora jiva joy sa prasad ani de lobai. So because of that verse ani de lobai, we don't say that verse on Ekadasi because it's mentioning Anna grains. And on Ekadasi, we're not taking prasadam in the sense of taking grains, we're taking anukalpa. So just remembering that. So, and here it's mentioning Anna, which normally will be considered in relationship with grains, but it says the living beings' bodies are manifest from food. Food is manifest due to rain. Rainfall ensues from performance of sacrifice, and action is the cause of sacrifice. So it's being said for food, but in the verse it's mentioned Anna, which is normally considered to be grains. So all living, elsewhere it's translated, all living entities subsist on food grains, and grains result from rains, and rains result from sacrifice, and sacrifices are due to the performance of sacrifices. In other words, action. So here we go on to 15, which is karma brahmodbhavan vidi brahmakshara samudbhavam tasmat sarvagatam brahma nityam yagye pratishtitam. Action is prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas originate in akshara, the imperishable. Therefore, the all-pervading imperishable Lord is ever present within the acts of sacrifice offered to him. Action is prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas originate in akshara, the imperishable. Therefore, the all-pervading imperishable Lord is ever present within the acts of sacrifice offered to him. So, as I said before, Yajna by Vishnu. All sacrifice is meant for actually satisfying the Lord. And evam pravartitam chakram nanu varta yati. Evam pravartitam chakram nanu varta yatiyaya agayor indriyaramo mogam parta sajivati. Evam pravartitam chakram nanu varta yatiyaya agayor indriyar ramo mogam parta sajivati. O Arjuna, one who does not respect this natural causal cycle leads a life of sin, enjoying the senses in vain. O Arjuna, one who does not respect this natural causal cycle leads a life of sin, enjoying the senses in vain. So someone who's just interested in pure enjoyment of the senses, but doesn't accept there's any responsibilities on his or her part, that's actually a cause of sinful existence, to not understand that you cannot just exploit the resources of nature and think you have no responsibility. That it's not just that everything is being grown or everything is being produced, but for your benefit. We can ultimately say that these things are meant as the elements utilized in sacrifice. In sacrifice, like if you're performing sacrifice, then what you're eating should be offered as sacrifice, in the sense you're offering what you're taking. You're not just eating it. Yas tvatmaratir eva shad atma triptas cha manava atmani eva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yas tvatmaratir eva shad atma triptas cha manava atmani eva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yet there is no duty to fulfill for the realized person who delights within the self, being fully satisfied within. His only worldly action or karma is as required for his subsistence. Yet there is no duty to fulfill for the realized person who delights within the self, being fully satisfied within. His only worldly action or karma is required for his subsistence. And ultimately, like in the prayers of Yamunacharya, he says, I owe prayers to the ancestors, owe so many responsibilities that I'm executing in the form of karma. I bid all of thee adieu, meaning I'm relinquishing my responsibilities, because my only responsibility now is that I am attached to the lotus feet to the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, and I think that this is sufficient for me. Otherwise, and you can understand, something of the spirit is there when it says, Sarvadharmam parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarvapapebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. They give up all these so-called forms of dharma, responsibilities, all these responsibilities. Sarvadharmam parityaja, worldly responsibilities. Sarvadharmam parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. So you just surrender to me, surrender to the Lord. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. I will relieve you, mokshayishyami ma shucha. I will relieve you from all fear. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo. You don't have to worry about accumulating sin. So don't worry. Mamekam sharanam vraja ham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. That you need not worry about these if you are actually living as a devotee of the Lord, offering everything to the Lord. Then that will include, because we don't have to propitiate the demigods and the forefathers or anything like this when we are engaged exclusively in the service of the Lord. That is expressed. Yet there is no duty to fulfill for the realized person who delights within the self, being fully satisfied within. His only worldly action or karma is required for his subsistence, what he has to do to live. Okay. Naiva tasya kritenarto nakriteneha kaschana nachasya sarvabhuteshu kaschid arta yapashraya. In the world, he neither gains by action nor loses by inaction. He does not depend on any other living being, from Lord Brahma down to the simplest life form, for any purpose. In the world, he neither gains by action nor loses by inaction. He does not depend on any other being, from Lord Brahma down to the simplest life form, for any purpose. And so he's not acting within the principles of action, reaction, of karma. He's engaged, his every thought and words, everything will ultimately be for the satisfaction of the Lord. Tasmada sakta sadatam karyam karma Samachara asakto yacharan karma param apnoti purusha. So perform your prescribed duties without attachment. By selflessly executing one's duty, a person attains liberation. True liberation is a state of pure devotion, attained in the maturity of selfless action. So perform your prescribed duties without attachment. By selflessly executing one's duties, a person attains liberation. True liberation is the state of pure devotion, attained in the maturity of selfless action. Because when one is on the, as it says, Brahma Bhuta Prashanatma Nashochatina Kankshati Samasarveshu Bhuteshu Mad Bhaktim Labate Param. On the platform of liberation, of release from all worldly responsibilities, where one no longer is lamenting over anything lost, nor desiring anything to be attained, that Mad Bhaktim Labate Param, on that platform of purity, of liberation, then Mad Bhaktim Labate Param, my devotional service begins. It begins when one is released from all these so-called, action and reaction to the laws of karma. So I'll read one more verse. Well, I'll read two more verses here. Karmanaiva I samsiddhim astita janakadaya loka sangraham evapi sambhasyam kartum arasi karmanaiva I samsiddhim astita janakadaya loka sangraham evapi sambhashyan kartum arasi. King Janaka and other learned personalities succeeded in attaining devotion through the execution of their prescribed duties. So it is fitting that you fulfill your duty in consideration of the welfare of the people. King Janaka and other learned personalities succeeded in attaining devotion through the execution of their prescribed duties. So it is fitting that you fulfill your duty in consideration of the welfare of the people. So for the welfare of the people and to perform your prescribed duty, Arjuna, you are a Kshatriya, then you will act under my direction. And ultimately that means that although we would normally see engaged in warfare as something so undesirable, but here Krishna is saying this is ultimately meant for the welfare of the people. They cannot, because in the very beginning we hear when the demigods went to offer the Purusha Shukta prayers to Lord Brahma, they were disturbed by the ungodly presence of the weight of so many demons upon the earth. And ultimately, as the Lord says, he says, Yuga nimeshena chakshusha prabhishaitam shunyayitam jagat sarvam govinda virahena me. Well, no. No, I'm quoting the wrong verse. Yada dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata bhyatanam dharmasya taratmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Whenever there's a decline in religious principles and a rise of irreligion, then the Lord himself corrects that situation. And he says, in doing so, he says, paritranaya sadhunam, I satisfy the saintly persons or the devotees, paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam, and eliminate demoniac persons and influences. Vinashaya chaduskritam dharma samstarpanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So to set things right, the Lord engages, himself appears, or he will engage his agents like Arjuna. He tells Arjuna. So it is fitting that you fulfill your duty in consideration of the welfare of people. So one would say that normally violence or battle, etc., is something undesirable, but here it's being mentioned that there may be situations which require some adjustment of the environment, and that adjustment may not in the case of, may not be, if there are tyrants and unscrupulous persons involved, they may not voluntarily agree to give up their power and their avarice, their greed. So then maybe those persons will be dealt with by proper agents of the Lord. In this case, not everyone's proper agent of the Lord because so many people don't even recognize the existence of the Lord. But Arjuna is being seen in that way. Krishna is talking directly to him. And then he says, Yad yad acharati shreshtas tad tad evetaro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokas tad anuvartate. The masses follow the action of great men, following the standards they set. The masses follow. So he's telling Arjuna, you have great persons must serve as an example for other persons, how that they should conduct themselves, how that they should live. Anyway, I'm going to stop here, and tomorrow we can continue. Here, okay. Hariharaya Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Madana Mohan Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Jai Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jai Te Vignana Shamishta Puran Jai Gosai Jar Mui Taradas Dasavar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Janame Janame More Abilas H.I. Gosai Jabe Braje Koilabas Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Korila Prakash Anande Bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Majai Aman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koriyas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamodas. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gora Haribo, 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 Haribo. Nitai Gora Haribo, 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 Haribo. Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Ju Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyasta Tarasata Shishimad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev-Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyasta Tarasata Shishimad Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev-Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Dasha Raghunath Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Premsigo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vishvavarenya Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Nirmal Acharya Maharaj Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Madhacharya Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Navadip Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Ki Jai. Saparshada Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Saparshada Shriman Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Shri Koladvip Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Soquel Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Seva Ashram Ki Jai. Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Tulasi Maharani Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Govardhan. Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Kalindi Yamuna Jo Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. All the assembled devotees Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.